While Mayor Ford is no stranger to being the subject of several news stories, the events that have transpired over the past few months have made the Mayor of Toronto an international celebrity. A video that allegedly shows the Mayor of Canada's largest city smoking crack cocaine has generated headlines around the world. That's probably the first time the word crack cocaine has ever been used at this podium. News of the video, which was not produced by the journalists, has also raised questions, some of them for the first time in Canada, on the way in which journalists and newspapers gather and report on people and events. Ethical journalism continues to be an increasingly salient issue as the topic remains at the forefront of Toronto's political and social landscape. Now, despite all of these reports and allegations, Mayor Ford recently has returned a poll of 49% approval, suggesting that he's almost as popular now as he was in 2010. This, no doubt, raises additional questions of his re-electability. How far should journalists go? Where's that fine line? These sensational stories have made newspapers and other media outlets millions of dollars. What is right? What is wrong? Who is right and who is wrong? To explore those questions today, we are fortunate to have with us a panel of celebrated journalists who are not only directly engaged with this topic, but are authorities on the subject at hand. Christy Blatchford has written for all 4 Toronto-based newspapers. She has won a National Newspaper Award for her column writing, and in 2008 won the Governor General's Literary Award in nonfiction. Christy is currently a National Post and Post Media columnist. Kevin Donovan is the investigative editor at the Toronto Star and a senior reporter. He has won the Michener Award for Public Service. By the way, Governor General Michener was a president of the Empire Club of Canada. He's won 3 National Newspaper Awards and 3 Canadian Association of Journalists Awards. Edward Keenan serves as the senior editor and lead columnist at The Grid magazine in Toronto. An 8-time finalist at the National Magazine Awards, he was the top editor at iWeekly. He's a contributing editor at Spacing magazine and writes widely on politics, sports, and culture. And finally, Lisa Taylor. She's good. She's a good one because she's a lawyer. She teaches at the School of Journalism at Ryerson University. She spent a decade with CBC Radio and Television in a wide range of journalistic roles, including co-creator and host of 2 nationally broadcast series. Among many other courses, Lisa, a former lawyer, teaches law and ethics in the practice of journalism. Take it away, Mr. Keenan.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. President, members of the Empire Club. I'd like to thank you for inviting me and us here today to talk about this topic. I work at The Grid magazine, which maybe people think is a hipster magazine. And at the risk of sounding like a hipster, I was into this Rob Ford stuff before anybody. I wrote a profile of him in 2006, at which point we were already, those of us who were at City Hall, asking questions about, like, is this guy for real? And actually, immediately after I wrote that profile, I started getting asked questions about whether this type of coverage was fair. It's a question that I've been discussing with people for a long time that's recently become a worldwide subject of discussion, whether or not the kinds of stories that tend to appear about Rob Ford are fair to the mayor. And so I think, as we've already heard, the panel is really well positioned to discuss that. You know, I've heard questions about fairness to the mayor about policy issues for a long time, transit and the budget and his relationship with labor unions. But I've also, for a long, long time, heard them about stories that seem to be about his personal life. And at a certain point, it was when the Toronto Sun published his mugshot on the front of the paper during the campaign, or when he was thrown out of a hockey game. And these stories continued after he became mayor, but they've blown up, as we all know, in the last several months because of the reports of a video that appears allegedly to show him smoking what appears to be crack cocaine, and then a series of investigations and crime stories, essentially, that surround the video or the circumstances under which this video became public. And we're lucky enough today to have one of the 3 people in the world who have publicly said that they've seen the video that kicked off that scandal, Kevin Donovan, with his colleague Robin Doolittle, who is also here, viewed that video and reported on it, and that kicked off the whole thing. So I thought it might be interesting to kick off this thing by asking Kevin to tell us a little bit about the decision to publish that, the process of publishing it, and maybe that will lead us into some of these issues that we've been asked to discuss today. Kevin?
Sure, thanks a lot, and thanks for having all of us here today. I'd like to start by saying I wish I had the video, and if I had the video, we would have shown it after that fabulous Empire Club video, but we're not there yet. A picture's worth 1,000 words. I guess a video would be worth 1,000 words, so I'll give you 4 words. The video is real. I saw it, Robin saw it. Do you notice the stir, Robin, when people heard you were here? We saw it, and everybody would like to see it. Just very briefly, how it all came about. The Star has been looking into activities of Mayor Rob Ford for quite some time. Robin and I published a story with the full backing of our editors in March about the Garrison Ball and how Mayor Ford was asked to leave because he was incoherent, stumbling, rambling, and clearly impaired. We wrote that story. That story prompted a phone call to the Star on April 1st, interesting day. But there was no fooling in what we were eventually told. We were told that there was a video of Mayor Ford, and Robin and I, with the backing of our editors, set out to try and get that video. We saw the video. We saw it 3 times, as we've described in the pages of the Toronto Star. It is absolutely real. I can guarantee you, in my 30-year career, I've never seen anything so dramatic and so upsetting as a person who believes in this city and thinks that we need to have good leaders in our city. We saw the video. We then set about trying to get it. We were not able to get it, but Robin and I, with the help of colleagues at the Star, began reporting out the story, trying to find out what we could find out about the people behind it. And in the midst of doing that, Gawker, the US website, published a story. I think it was about 8:15 p.m. On a day in May, and Michael Cook, our wonderful boss, summoned all of us in. I think I was on a soccer field coaching at that time, and we all came into the Star, a whole bunch of us, everybody who's at our table here today, and we got to work. We contacted the mayor. We tried to get comments from everybody involved. We were hung up by the mayor's chief of staff. We received no comment from the mayor. We took a letter to his house, to his brother's house. It was classic Ford lack of response. We did everything we could in that 3-hour period to try and get a response. We felt that we had no choice, with this news already blazing around the world about the existence of this video, to tell what we had seen, what Robin and I saw. And it was very clear that we had to publish that story, and we did. And since that, all of us, including my great colleague Jamie Poisson, who's here, many other people at the Star, my whole investigative team has been involved in it, working on doing stories and publishing more stories. One of the best is simply the story about how the mayor's people close to him were trying to find the video. Why do you try and find a video if a video doesn't exist?
Okay, so that leads to a lot of questions, I think, some for journalists and some that especially occur to people who are not professional journalists. So one of those is that you were working on a story, you were still working on it. So there may be an assumption some people make that if you're still working on it, it's not ready to go yet. But it became ready to go immediately when Gawker published their similar report. Why is that you're suddenly more confident? Or can you explain to people? I think I have an understanding of it, but can we talk a little bit about that decision to publish before you were entirely ready to publish?
Well, we were still trying to get the video. That was what was going on. We had We held out a lot of hope that through some sort of moral suasion we could get these people to turn over the video. As I'm sure many of you know, they were asking a great deal of money for it. The Toronto Star was not prepared to pay for that. We thought there might be another a copy of the video out there. And so that's what we were trying to do. But when Gawker published its story, we already had, Robin and I had seen the video. And I was thinking, Christy, you have been on many overseas assignments. You've been to Afghanistan, I've been to Afghanistan. We've seen things, and we've written about them because we've seen them. And long before there was video and there was instant ability to email a digital image, that's what journalists have been doing. We've been traveling around the world looking at things. So we felt that because Gawker had published its story and put it out there, we would be remiss in not saying, we saw this too. And the only thing in that story that I think people miss is that we're saying it's Mayor Rob Ford. We're saying he is smoking what appears to be crack cocaine. That is the one thing that we can't prove because, as his lawyer told us that night, how do you know what somebody's smoking when you're looking at a video? The issue here is, what's he smoking? We described how he was acting, how he was incoherent, rambling, appeared to be impaired. Trust me, the man was impaired. I just don't know what got him impaired.
Now, this is something, you just touched on it. And I was kind of surprised by the volume of people and the volume at which they said it, saying that essentially if you can't produce a video, then there's no story. And that, to me, is never how journalism has worked. I can produce a video of very few of the things I write about. I go and I'm an eyewitness. Sometimes I record interviews. I try to record interviews. Sometimes I have my notes of what happened. But I very seldom can produce a video. Like, Christy, in your understanding, is that if you don't have the proof, should you, that kind of proof?
Well, I think it's a function of the modern world. I mean, we didn't used to deal in things like video. Kevin's quite right. People would rely on journalists to be the eyewitnesses. That's what our function is. And I don't disagree with you that there was a large volume of people, there still is, I think, who say, well, if you don't have the video, it's not true. I absolutely believe, of course. I mean, I know Kevin and Robin's reputations. I know what good journalists they are. I know absolutely there's a video, or there was, and that you saw what you saw. But I think for journalists, it posed a really interesting conundrum, because how do you report on something that you haven't seen? I mean, when I witness a battle in Afghanistan, I write about it. You could not match the story. You couldn't, because you weren't there. And similarly, it used to be that when a journalist had a scoop or an exclusive and the other journalists couldn't develop a similar story on their own, they couldn't match it. It doesn't seem to matter anymore. So for journalism, for journalists, the ground is somewhat shifting, because now with this story, I'm writing about something third hand. I have no sources. I mean, some of the people since your first story, the Toronto Sun has actually done some really good work on the other aspects of it. The Globe and Mail, as you may know, has done some other work. Let me just say on that, if anybody went to my high school, it wouldn't take them 18 frigging months to come up with bad stuff about me.
The only thing I disagree with when you said the Toronto Sun has done good work, because I haven't seen a single good piece of journalism out of Warmington.
No, I'm not talking about Warmington. I'm talking about San Pisano on the court side, because they've followed some of the Project Traveler is a big police project which is linked to an address which is linked to the video. But I'm getting a bit sidetracked. I mean, some journalists were able to develop their own stories in the wake of the First Star series of stories on this, but most of us frankly can't. I mean, oddly, as an old white broad, my connections, you know, in drug dealing neighborhoods aren't really terrific, right? And I think many of us are in similar straits. So instead, I'm writing about a video which I know absolutely existed, which you guys saw, but I've never seen. Now it looks like I'm never gonna see. And yet I'm kind of asking my readers to trust me because I trust you. And I think that's odd.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
So I lean back so my giant
there are so
head
many
doesn't-
things in there, because that I'm asking readers to trust me because I trust the source of information is something that often comes up with anonymous sources. They're not anonymous to me when or to most journalists who use them, the journalists know who those people are. They have a reason to trust their credibility, and so they use their own credibility as a stand-in. They say, I can't tell you who this is, but trust me, this is good information. And we're all sort of using you as not an anonymous source, but a source we trust because we can't see the video. But
they were the witnesses.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to bootstrap onto your viewing by matching a story. If I were to try and do that, I'm bootstrapping on your credibility. You were the witness, not me. And it's a weird kind of third-hand reporting that makes me uneasy.
But Gordon Sinclair, for example, famous Toronto Star and CBC journalist, traveled around the world, and he saw things. And he saw things before there was video. And he wrote about them. He bore witness. That's what journalists do.
But his colleagues back home weren't matching it and saying, Gordon wrote about this.
You know what? They probably did.
No,
I think they probably
did.
There's a tradition of following stuff that the Toronto Star writes, I find. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But you know what? Beyond that, I think Peter C. Newman had an anecdote about a big story he broke about a confidential document. And I heard him speak about it, and so I actually didn't have access to the details. But his story of how he got access to that confidential document is that he was invited to a cabinet minister's home. It was illegal to share this document. This person could be charged for showing it to him. But so what he did is that he invited him into his office and said, you know, oh, I have the documents here. I actually can't show them to you. It's illegal for me to show them to you. But I do have a meeting I have to take in the next room for the next hour or so. So if you can just sit tight here while I go. And then he left him in the room with the document, right? And now Peter Newman didn't take photographs of that document. He didn't have original copies of it. He didn't have photocopies. He wrote notes based on reading it himself and reported that. And the rest of the press would accept as a fact. Now, they would try to follow it by confirming or denying that this document exists, that it said this and all of that. But the rest of the press traditionally, if there's a report that's factuality is not seriously in question, then we don't necessarily just re-report it, but we accept it as a fact for the ongoing conversation,
not to
right?
the degree that happened here. I mean, I've broken plenty of stories in my day, which were not as big as this, but were substantial. I mean, I'm thinking of a story about a former police board member named Arnold Miners, who was also a race relations consultant for the Bob Rae government, which was my favorite time of the year, or famous decade. Anyway, this guy was teaching Crown attorneys that the Holocaust wasn't a racist act because it hadn't been committed against black people. And I wrote about it, and I wrote lots of stories about it, and no one at the Star ever matched it. No one at the Globe ever matched it. No one could, because they didn't have the sources that I did, the Crown attorneys who ultimately came to testify in my defense in the lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. So there are plenty of stories where they would never catch fire the way that this one did. Now, partly it caught fire because of its subject matter.
Yes.
You know, the crack cocaine, mayor, blah, blah, blah. But the other part of it was this new thing, where we are now relying on somebody else. That's all. Anyway, maybe we're getting sidetracked. I didn't mean to.
No, that's okay.
To what extent were journalists from other news organizations not necessarily reporting on the allegations themselves, but reporting on the circus that was generated as a result of that? I mean, the day after day of the mayor acting as if it were business as usual, as if there was, don't know what you're all doing here. This comes as such a surprise. And then finally the pseudo denial that felt like something that perhaps someone's child might do when they get into trouble. I am not currently doing this, so trust me, we're done. I think a lot of the stories were, at least at first, as other news organizations rather tentatively and holding their noses got into this story, were much more about, is he going to say it? Is he going to acknowledge it? What's he going to say about it?
Well, and this raises another issue that's part of this, which is where the line is between what's his personal business and what's the public's business. And I think for many people, the idea of crack cocaine, because it's crack, it's that street drug that people, they get addicted to it right away, right? You can't just be a casual crack user. But when we talk about substance abuse, when we talk about alcohol abuse, when we talk about crack cocaine, it seems like these could be considered personal problems that a public figure could have that might not influence how they do their job. And even to the extent that we report on the distraction, the circus around that, his refusal to deny this or his whatever, if you believe at stage one that this is something that shouldn't be reported on, or that we don't really have the public doesn't really have an interest in, then the rest of those things are media created. And so when we talk about whether we're treating the mayor fairly, maybe that's part of the question that people ask, is this a legitimate matter of public interest? How do we decide that?
But I think what we try to do at the Toronto Star is deal with issues where it would or does appear to impact on his public life. There are pieces of information that we have that we're not publishing because we consider them, at least for now, to be more about his private life. The Garrison Ball, the story that Rob and I did that got this particular phase of the Mayor Ford juggernaut going, was a very public event. It's the Garrison Ball. It's a very important event in Toronto. It raises money for wounded warriors, and many people, perhaps even some people who were here, were in attendance. And at 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, you don't want the chief official of the city to be acting in a manner that ultimately gets him removed from the place. If somebody wants to go to their cottage and kick back and, I guess, have some crack, whatever you might do, we're not going to be doing that. We're not going to be looking into that. But we are looking into things that are public events. And when you're a public person and you've signed on to be a public person, there is a certain decorum. And I think that's really, really important. And you have to behave yourself. And when you go to an event, you just cannot be seen to be anything other than a person to be respected. And I think that's what we focused on.
That's why I voted for Rob Ford, frankly.
Because he's more fun?
Because of and I am more rare than you. You're one of 3 people who's seen the video. How many will admit to voting for Rob Ford? I thought not. And by the way, regretted it immediately, but nonetheless. And part of the reason, though, was that he isn't part of this sort of prissy kind of sense that, one must behave. I mean, I'm a person who used to take my top off on tables in bars. Sometimes in the presence of some Star editors, I believe. So I'm just saying, we are the least likely group of moral sort of, we shouldn't be trying to uphold anybody's, saying you must behave in a certain manner and you must always be, it's all that stuff. It wasn't actually Rob Ford I voted for. It was a reaction to that kind of horrible, what I regard as horrible prissiness. So anyway, sorry.
Well, I think...
I am not expressing myself well today.
No, but I don't think you're alone in that, because I think actually it's interesting. You once in a column, and I don't recall the exact wording, I'm sorry, but you had an analogy that's sort of like he's always been the fat girl at Holt Renfrew asking where the plus size section is, right?
That's right.
And it's a big part of his brand, though, that he's like just folks, and he says things that a lot of people think are outrageous, and he doesn't observe the social niceties. And that drives a lot of people nuts. I mean, when we talk about whether he's being treated fairly or not, he sort of we all accept that Rob Ford's word is that I'm an outsider, and I have outsider stuff, outsider attitudes that may shock you, but I just as who I is, right? But the thing is that he was also, he's a fat girl who's been shopping at Holt Renfrew since the day he was born, right?
Yeah.
His father was a member of provincial parliament and successful business owner. He's friends with the finance minister of Canada. The guy has never wanted for anything in his life, but...
And it's how he's designed his brand, though, that has made certain things that might be off limits in the case of another politician to be within what I would consider to be fair game here. I bet you most people in this room don't know the age or name of Stephen Harper's children, because that is not part of his brand. Okay, some would. That is not part of his brand. Rob Ford has positioned himself as that guy, that loud, fun guy at hockey games, the guy who wants to talk publicly about his weight. So you talk publicly about your weight, but then you're distressed when others do. You talk about how your family is salt of the earth in Etobicoke, but then when someone points out that you're not, it's not fair game. So if you use those other aspects of your life You know, it's no different than an American politician or 9 that we've seen present themselves as being the family values candidates. Then it makes it fair game when we find out that they are anything but the family values type.
Right, but see, this is, a lot of people will remember, in the election during which Rob Ford was elected mayor, one of the early prominent, I don't know that he was actually a poll-leading candidate, but a prominent candidate, David Miller's chosen heir apparent, was Adam Jambroni, who resigned for cheating on his girlfriend. Right? This is what happened, is that it was front page news in the Star. They had this anti-Jambroni vendetta, famously. No, wait, that's Rob Ford.
I think his offense was that he stained the couch in his office.
Misuse of city property was the problem.
And he lied about it. He had made his girlfriend a big part of his... I mean, many people could not name Rob Ford's wife. I could, but I've never seen her. I've never met her. I've seen her at public events twice, but... because that's not part of his thing. But being a screw-up certainly is, right? The first time we heard about him, many people heard about him, was this hockey game. Then we see his mugshot. He liked... So yeah, maybe we've already accepted that. But does that make it more or less a matter of public interest when he does things that feed into that? I don't know.
I think one of the things that people should try and recall is how many times Mayor Rob Ford has ever answered questions. And it's, at least as far as I'm concerned, the Toronto Star, 0 times that we have ever had any response from him on any of this. For the years, I think the last real mea culpa he did was related to, and I think it was the Post that did the story on him at the ACC. And he said he wasn't there, and it turns out he was there, and he apologized, and he's made some mistakes in his life.
So that was in 2005, I think.
2005?
It was either
Maybe
2005 or early 2006, because it was prior to my extended meeting with him. So.
And my feeling is that he does not want to engage with us at all. And I think it's very clever on his part that he does not engage with us, because if he did and he started trying to explain things, then the onion would really start to unravel. And he won't do that. They will not respond to any questions. And when you think of politicians, we do demand that they respond to us. And I think that is very important. And I think they have to, because we're paying them to lead our cities or our provinces or our governments, and they have to respond, and he won't.
I think we should put this all, though, in some realpolitik kind of background sense, too. I think there's no question that Kevin and Robin's stories have been fair, etc., but I think it's disingenuous to pretend that it happened in a vacuum. Editorially, the Star was aghast, as were most of my friends, that Rob Ford even had the temerity to run for mayor. How can you imagine? I mean, really, that's what it was like. And it's certainly all my friends and my little running group the next morning, all good Toronto Liberals, were just mortified. It was most delightful, actually, when he won that one morning before he actually did anything. So there was that sort of sense of, the Toronto establishment, if you like, people like y'all and me were regarded him as a clown from the get-go. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm just trying to put it into, it's not as though the Toronto Star in a Atkinsonian principle sense decided that we're going to take the high road and look at this guy, etc. And the Star has, and other papers have sometimes been unfair to him. I mean, posting a picture of him sneaking into Kentucky Fried Chicken, taken by posting or talking about pictures of him that were taken when he bought a Mickey at the liquor store. I mean, quite frankly, he may be a public figure, but I think that is going too far.
Okay, but he was in the middle of a... The Star did not put a circus-sized scale outside of his office and publicize his attempts to lose weight. And actually, the Star didn't decide that that would be the only time of any given week that he would ever talk to the press, right? So it's like this weight loss issue becomes something that the Ford brothers, and they really did decide that issue together, decide is of public interest, right? They've made it an issue of public interest. And then I think the Sun actually as well posted that same video of the Kentucky Fried Chicken, which,
But it's interesting, you use the word circus, and that's really interesting, because when the Cut the Waste Challenge was finally shut down, Doug Ford disparagingly said, oh, it's just turned into a circus. Well, yeah, because you did, in fact, put the circus tent just outside the door. Journalists have a finely tuned nose for evidence of hypocrisy.
Oh, please.
Hello.
Hello.
You know, when we all
do
know that
not.
we do too. We all know that Barack Obama has struggled with smoking cigarettes. Seems kind of light given smoking crack, but still with smoking cigarettes. But we've never ever heard of him calling up other world leaders and saying, hey, let's have a butt out challenge. It'll be so fun, guys. That was his personal issue, and he kept it a personal issue. So you can't take something as public as this. You can't, and it's one that's always troubled me, speak disparagingly of social programs after the Danzig Street shooting and saying, I'm just not into hug-a-thug programs, and then later be seen in a photograph hugging a thug.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, and this when we ask the question about whether the mayor is being treated fairly, that photograph is actually a good example, because there is a photograph that was provided to Gawker and to the Toronto Star as evidence that a video existed before you saw it, I think, by the same person who showed them the video. And in that photograph, there is one young man who has been shot dead in a sort of execution-style shooting, another young man who was shot at the same time but survived and who is now under arrest during a gang and guns raid, another young man who is also under arrest, and then there's the mayor of Toronto, right? And so the circumstances under which the press came to own this photo, or have this photo, and the circumstances under which it's taken are maybe questions that we'd ask the mayor. And there could be innocent explanations, like, I was visiting my old high school friend there at that house it was taken in front of, and these guys were walking by and asked me to take a photo. But no explanation is offered, right? And so even when bigger and bigger questions that seem maybe more concerning come up, he still refuses to address the questions, so it's easy to imagine an innocent explanation, but that innocent explanation is never provided. And so, I mean, in fairness to the press, I think you have to, do we have to read something into the fact that he won't explain himself? Because that's the defining element of Rob Ford as mayor to me, is that he refuses to explain himself.
Sure, but from the get-go, he's the architect of his own demise in so many ways. I mean, he won't speak to the Star. Does he still not speak to anybody from the Star? I assume not. He doesn't make his schedule public, which is something he should do. In my view, every mayor should be holding weekly, wide-ranging press conferences where, you know, if you did it every week, maybe they wouldn't always be asking you about the crack video. Maybe there'd be other issues. So there's no question he's created the atmosphere, but I think that doesn't lessen the burden upon all of us to try and still be fair to him. Just because he's he's created, as they say in Quebec, he's created the conditions that allow us to have a field day with him. But I still think we have a responsibility to not do things like run pictures of him at KFC. I mean, in that story, I agree he created the conditions, but the scales told the tale, as they always do with weight loss. He was cheating. Do we have to have pictures of him cheating?
Go ahead, Kevin.
I just want to go back about 5 minutes to the comment that I can't let pass that the Toronto Star has a vendetta against Rob Ford. We don't.
I didn't say that.
No, not you,
Oh,
not you, not
okay.
you.
Well, who made it then?
I don't think I said that. Anyway, let's say it was in the air.
Yeah.
It was definitely in the air.
Yeah, it was
that,
in the
that
air.
people think that the Toronto Star or perhaps other media have a vendetta. Let me just give you a little cook's tour of our newsroom. There is no sign that says, here's who we're going to get this week or this month. People always think that about journalists, that we are given marching orders. I run our investigative team. I've got great people on the team. We investigate all sorts of things. We did a big investigation a couple of years ago on Orange Air Ambulance, which some of you may have read. It was something very much in the public interest. A lot of other media covered it. A lot of good things happened as a result. I was the one who ran that and did most of the reporting on it. And I wasn't out to get Chris Mazza or Orange or the Liberal government. I happened to end up, by doing my stories, make them all look really, really poorly. And the stories that we're doing now on Mayor Ford started in the way that all good journalism starts. You maybe write a story, as we did, and Robin Doolittle gets a call suggesting we look into something. It happens to be a crack video of the mayor. We'd be fired, I would hope, if we hung up the phone and said we're not interested in that. And just one other comment, which has come to my mind in the last few weeks. is that I would much rather be here answering questions, as I'm always happy to do about this, than answering questions in 20 years from people saying, why didn't you look into these matters? Because that is really important. That is the job of journalists and really all of us in society to question power.
I think people lose sight of that. Sorry, just one thing. People lose sight of that because journalism is in such a crisis of credibility right now, a huge crisis. But I just want to point out, and I believe you two will back me up on, you three will back me up on this. I think people believe that journalists are very cavalier about deciding to advance a story based on anonymous sources, based on evidence that they cannot hand over. If you've never done journalism, you can't imagine how much journalists don't want to do that, because they know that on some level their credibility is going to take some degree of hit. Maybe only in certain circles on the periphery, but people don't want that. And reasonable news organizations do not allow that to happen unless they've reported the hell out of the story otherwise and are really confident. But I don't know if the public knows that.
Say that, and I think we're almost out of time. So, but I did want to say that to that exact question of like trying to be fair is that I know many members of the press gallery at City Hall do bend over backwards. And there's one anecdote I was covering before this whole crack scandal spoke up.
An effort to be fair.
To the mayor.
Sorry.
No, but the mayor was on trial for conflict of interest. He could have been removed from office from that, and we watched his full day of testimony, and we were all outside, and it was sort of devastating to watch because he offered no real defense of himself. It was a spectacle. And I was talking to a couple other people, and there were two journalists, like reporters from the dailies, who came up, and they were both sort of had to file immediate reports, and they were just like, can you think of any way I can present this that doesn't look like I'm running a hatchet job on the mayor? Right? Because the truth appears to be a hatchet job, right? Like if I just report what I saw,
sure,
my credibility is going to take a hit, and I find that that's often the case with the mayor.
I agree. I think it is, and anybody who thinks newspapers are organized enough to have targets with people and goals to bring somebody down is foolish. Most organizations don't, and we don't either. However, I still don't think that gets us entirely away from the fact that, and it's not an agenda, it's nothing like that, but I think that we can make the case that the press has gone over the top, and I would say Exhibit 1 in that regard would be the Star's coverage of an Ontario Press Council hearing a little while ago, which was basically given World War III coverage. Every nuance of the Rosie DiMano, who like me is from another planet, actually tweeted for the first time in her life, and the next morning the sun came up in the west. That's all I'm saying.
So
because I mean, that coverage was excessive. So if you all and us all, we all want to keep our credibility intact, we have to be careful not to. I've been a member of the Ontario Press Council. This had hearings into the complaints about unfair coverage against the Star and the Globe. And, it was a fairly brief proceeding, I believe, at least the Globe part of it was. And it's a serious proceeding. I took it seriously when I was a member, and I think it was well deserving of coverage. What it wasn't deserving of was the blow by blow. They're walking in the room now, I mean, really? It's a press council hearing. So
okay.
That's Exhibit A.
So we're actually
but Christy,
out of
we're trying to
time.
be transparent. I mean, the Press Council is an important organization.
You guys never cover it ordinarily. Give me a break.
We always cover it. We cover it
No.
when we're...
When you're being slapped, sure.
Okay, so we're actually out of time. So but in conclusion here, there's a few things, which is that this debate, like the rest of the Rob Ford story, is not finished yet, even if our event is. And that you can play it 300-point type on the front page, and it's good for business, right? Whether or not it's good for the city, whether or not it's fair.
I don't know if it's good for journalism.
I don't know if it's good for journalism.
No.
But I think Rob Ford sells papers. That's my experience.
Not enough of them.
Thank you to all of you for being here, and to Mr. President for having us.
I forgot to, before I call upon MJ to do the thank you, I forgot to mention to our speakers that every word that is said at the Empire Club of Canada is transcribed and then later put into our red book that is then sent to every embassy in the world and every library in Canada. And I can assure you that the following statements have never been in this book in 110 years. I just is who I is. I'm an old white broad who can't score crack. A fat girl at Holt Renfrew. I voted for Rob Ford. He stained the couch in his office. Temerity. Barack Obama does not smoke crack, but he smokes cigarettes. And finally, the Toronto Star is not responsible for the circus-sized scale outside the mayor's office. All of that will be put in the book, and we thank you very much for your time here. MJ.
Before I thank our guests, I would like to thank one of my board colleagues who was unable to be here today. Stephen Hewitt put a lot of work into this event and unfortunately was unable to join us. The press is said to be the fourth estate and also represent the values of the society. And those values are constantly changing. In Canada, from when Joseph Howe first went to court to prove it was more important for a journalist to tell the truth than to respect an elected official, all the way through to today's events. Think back of how Sir John A. Macdonald was reported, how we didn't hear that much about Maggie Trudeau when she was still married to the Prime Minister. But as values change and as we find them sometimes conflicting, that's when we have to make the decisions, and we have to make those hard decisions of how we will proceed in an ethical manner. Thank you to the four of you for helping us just do a little bit of that beginning of proceeding, of deciding where do our values lie and how do we want them to go forward and reflect who our leaders are and therefore reflect who we are. Thank you all so very much for being at the Empire Club of Canada today.
Finally, I'd like to thank Mr. Discount for sponsoring our student table this afternoon. I'd like to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor. We'll have to check the ethics on that one. Thank you to Van Valkenburg for providing our AV. This meeting will be carried and aired on Rogers TV, and we're very grateful for their ongoing support. We're on Twitter, and we're on Facebook, and we have our web address, which is empireclub.org. Thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you again soon. This meeting of the Empire Club of Canada is now adjourned.